If he invades Venezuela or gives more money to Ukraine, his movement will dissolve.
The American dream will officially be dead, and millions of voters will forever associate MAGA with its decline. Welcome to the midterms. Welcome to 2028. This is the barrel of the gun that we are looking down.
I was done with MAGA at the moment he looked us in the face and he said, "What files?" Right? What are we still talking about? Jeffrey Epstein? Pam Bondi said it was a Democrat hoax. No, I think the entire nation has been hoaxed by Republicans and Democrats.
MAGA is dead. Now we're in the America First debate. Soon it's going to be the America Only debate.
Does voting matter anymore?
I don't know.
I
don't know whether voting matters.
Me so much. Like looking back, I don't. We didn't really have much of a option here, but I mean, at least so we thought. But nothing I voted for happened.
Listen, regardless of where you land on the political spectrum, I think we could all admit Sean Ryan is all of us in what he said in that clip, because I think most Americans feel disappointed with the politicians they support, vote in favor of, and then they, again, like to pull the rug from underneath you and they don't live up to their promises. But that is ripping the GOP base, the Republican base apart at this moment. And it really has to do with the performance of the Trump administration in relation to the various promises that were made by President Trump on the campaign trail. And I really do want to give the various people that we're about to hear from credit for just doing an honest analysis of the job President Trump is doing in his second term. Because I can't stand partisan shillery, okay? And there's a lot of that going on where people are so blinded by their loyalty to their tribe that they are unable to see how their own favored politicians are either screwing them over or not living up to expectations. I think the only way things will get better in this country is if we are willing to see these politicians for who they are and judge them based on the job that they're doing. And it's not gonna matter if a Democrat is critical of the Trump administration. It matters way more when members of the Republican Party, the Republican base, specifically voters, are willing to hold their politicians' feet to the fire. And the same is true of Democrats in regard to Democratic politicians. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on, because this Republican civil war continues to ripple through the party as the result of President Donald Trump, in their words, betraying the America First crowd. And as you just saw, conservatives are noticing that foreign countries and corporate donors are the only ones becoming great again. But ordinary Americans are still struggling to get by. So this is a story about priorities, about the current economic situation in the United States, and more. Meanwhile, the vast majority of congressional Republicans are essentially following Trump's orders, bowing their heads. There are a few exceptions, but those are the individuals, people like Thomas Massey, for instance, who have to deal with the viciousness of Donald Trump over Massey's unwillingness to be blindly loyal to him, even when he doesn't agree with what Trump is doing. So there are, again, a select few congressional Republicans who are trying to do the right thing here, like Senator Rand Paul, who I disagree with politically on pretty much everything, with the exception of foreign policy. I think the more libertarian leaning politicians are better on foreign policy than Republicans, and honestly, these days, even Democrats. So why don't we get to the next clip and hear what Rand Paul has to say.
Lindsey Graham has not changed his positions, but he's clever and he's become very close to the president and influences the president. Same with Marco Rubio. So the pending invasion or regime change war in Venezuela is hatched by those people. I actually think Trump is the one who is least likely to want to do these things, but he's surrounded by people who believe in regime change and are goading him on. I do think, though, that if he invades Venezuela, or if he approves significant arms sales, which are really gifts to Ukraine, or more welfare to Ukraine, if he does either of those, the rift with Marjorie Greene will pale in comparison to what happens to his movement if he invades Venezuela or gives more money to Ukraine. His movement will dissolve.
So if you're spending a lot of time on X, chances are you're seeing a lot of posts from people who purport to be on Team Trump, totally supporting the idea of military action against Maduro in Venezuela. However, that's not reality, because if you look at the polling, upward of 70% of Americans are against the US military going into Venezuela to do a regime change war. Only 30% are in favor. And so a sizable portion of Republican voters don't want this. Remember, they voted for Trump because he was the guy who was like, I will not start any new wars. Well, now it looks like he's poised to start a new war that is totally avoidable. Now, Nicolas Maduro, I don't have love for him, okay? But I don't care to go in, risk the lives of our soldiers and expend resources we do not have as a country that's currently drowning in tens of trillions of dollars in debt. I just don't think it's a smart move to invade, especially when Maduro is like, what do you want, Trump? I'll do whatever you need me to do. What do you want? You want the oil? Let's make a deal. So there are opportunities to solve whatever Trump thinks he needs to solve through diplomacy, but he doesn't want to do that, which I think is incredibly strange. So again, he does appear poised to go to war with Venezuela. Hopefully he'll pull back, but we don't know yet. Newsmax anchor Michael Savage, who, as you can imagine, is the furthest thing from being a left winger, is even calling Trump out on this. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
You don't have to be a genius to understand what's happening. So I'll make it simple for you. A few weeks ago, we had a dinner in the White House for the tech titans, Microsoft, Facebook, Google. They all had dinner with Trump. They all hated him during the election. Then they all turned around and loved him and paid for the ballroom. And in return, they got H-1B visas for lower paid workers, in plain English.
When you make promises and you repeat those promises over and over and over again on the campaign trail, you can't then turn around and break every single one of those promises and expect your base to continue supporting you. Now, Trump got away with a lot more in the first term, but to be fair, I think that he actually did provide some cookies to his base in the first term. This time around, I've seen him enrich himself quite a bit.
You know what TYT's always been about? Taking on the corrupt, greedy establishment. For us, it's the corporate media. We've been fighting that fight for over 20 years. For the cell phone industry, it's the same story. A handful of massive corporations ripping you off. That's why we're partnering with Noble Mobile. They're the only wireless company with the same mission as ours, to fight back. Their No Bull plan offers unlimited data for just $50 a month. But here's the best part. For any data you don't use, you get cash back. Real money you can spend however you want. Stop letting your unused data pad the pockets of billionaires. With Noble, you take control over your data. And by switching to Noble, you're directly supporting TYT in our mission of bringing you honest, independent news. So give Noble a try and make the switch today. Scan the QR code on the screen now or visit go.tyt.com/plan. That's go.tyt.com/plan.
I've seen the Trump administration focus on, sending more and more military aid abroad. The war in Ukraine rages on. I thought it was gonna be over in 24 hours once Trump is in office, once he's inaugurated. Obviously that didn't happen. Obviously he wasn't serious in saying that it was gonna end in 24 hours. But obviously the foreign policy issues that he treated as if they were just like simple things that he can just manage immediately are way more complex, way more complicated than he made them out to be. And so again, when you break all these promises, there will be political ramifications to that. I want to skip ahead to Raheem Kassem, who is the former editor-in-chief of Breitbart London. He wrote the following: President Trump must quickly return to his own populist roots and campaign pledges, rather than entertaining the big pharma or big bank bosses and floating non-starter ideas like 50-year mortgages. I mean, obviously, I agree with him on that. 50-year mortgages are a slap in the face for Americans who are struggling to buy homes in the tightest housing market, probably ever. We are having a crisis because of the lack of inventory. And what has Trump done in regard to private equity buying up homes? Nothing. What has Trump done in terms of spurring the development of new homes? Nothing. He has focused on foreign policy quite a bit. He has focused on, manipulating various federal government deals with corporations so he can enrich himself, which was an incredible expose that was reported by the New York Times just this week. But in regard to bettering the quality of life for the American people and his base in particular, well, they're just not seeing it. And they're right in calling him out on this. There's more. So on the topic of 50-year mortgages, Savannah Hernandez, who's lovely, I disagree with her politically, but we've had her on her take, and she's a reporter. She's a conservative reporter, but she's also, interested in the facts. And in this case, she's calling out the 50-year mortgages. She says, we voted for home affordability and we were given 50-year mortgages and debt slavery. Americans voted to feel safe, prioritized, and protected. And every time we try to voice our concerns, we are labeled as anti-MAGA, anti-Israel, or anti-Trump for bringing forth substantial criticism of the direction of the party. And again, everyone we've cited so far is a conservative. These are not leftists. These are not Democrats. These are not liberals. And there's more. Like, if they're clearly furious with Trump, by the way, they should keep doing what they're doing. Because the only way to ensure that your party's representatives and your president is carrying out the promises that were made on the campaign trail is if you as conservatives are willing to hold his feet to the fire. Because Trump's not gonna care what liberals think or what Democrats think, obviously. The only people that he does seem to care about at least a little bit is his own base. So let's get to some other examples. Look, Tucker Carlson hasn't really been like a little wilting flower when it comes to being critical of the Trump administration. So he explained how the Republican Party has been hijacked by its donors. And that is absolutely true. That's not novel in our political system. The same is true of the Democratic Party. But nonetheless, let's take a look at what he had to say.
Does the Republican Party exist to help its voters, every voter actually, every citizen, or does it exist for some other boutique corrupt reason, like serving a foreign government, serving your donors? And I do think that's the argument. I think that's the argument that Trump started when he ran in 2015. It was not about make America great again, which everyone is for, who wouldn't be for that. It's about America first, which is the idea behind MAGA. America first, just put your country first. If you're its leader, you don't have to put America first, you're just a citizen. But if you're running the country, you have a moral obligation to put its citizens before all others. It's not a controversial idea, it's the only idea. By the way, that's the Fuentes, that's the actual Fuentes message. I'm not an expert on Fuentes, okay, I interviewed him. But from what I could tell, he is angry because he feels that the conservative establishment, Ben Shapiro all the way up to some idiot Republican senator, all of them are telling the same lie. We're on your side, but they're not.
And in 2016, when Bernie voters, a sizable portion of Bernie Sanders supporters and voters on the Democratic side, switched sides and ended up voting for Donald Trump, it wasn't because they were enamored with a funny looking man who presents himself as a tremendously successful billionaire. No, they voted for him because of the populist messaging. And you can't continue to pretend as though you're an economic populist as Americans are getting absolutely crushed by our economy. And as they're being crushed by our economy, Trump turns around and does what the Biden administration did. Gaslight voters. Tell voters, no, this is the greatest economy that's ever occurred in the United States. Now, to be fair to Biden, he didn't say that. But I do remember the endless commentary from supporters of the Democratic Party, from members of Biden's administration, just chiding anyone who complained about the economy. No, what are you talking about? GDP is doing great. Yeah, but inflation was crushing Americans. And acknowledging corporate price gouging after the fact isn't really gonna help anyone, is it? So nothing wakes people up faster. Nothing makes Americans more clear-eyed about our current political situation than a bad economy. Because you can't lie about a bad economy. People feel it in their personal lives. They feel it every single day. And so I'm really happy to see that there are people on the right who are willing to stand up and say to Trump and the Trump administration overall, you aren't delivering for us. Again, the only thing that makes our political system better is if voters are willing to call out members of their own party. Because again, Trump is only gonna care about his base. Democrats are only gonna care about their base. If they're getting negative feedback from voters on the other side of the aisle, well, you're not gonna vote for me anyway, who cares? But when your own base is furious with the job you're doing, you're more likely to listen. And honestly, Trump's priorities in this term have been all over the place. It's all about him. And it's all about, his donors, the tech industry. I mean, he is fighting tooth and nail right now to ensure that states will not be able to regulate artificial intelligence within their own state borders. Why is he doing that? Could it be because the tech industry heavily funded his campaign? Yeah, that's what it's about. Is AI data centers something that Trump voters were thinking they were signing up for? AI data centers in their own neighborhoods, their own communities, which will jack up energy prices in their own neighborhoods, their own communities. Is that what they signed up for when they cast their ballots for Donald Trump? I doubt it. So yeah, people are getting increasingly angry and I don't blame them. And while I didn't vote for Trump and I know for a fact Trump would never care what I have to say, I'm living in this economy as well. And I see the pain, I see the suffering, and running on making America great again and then leading the country in this way, it's gonna lead to backlash, and I'm happy to see it.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.